When a state consistently produces rent-seeking behavior, it is tempting to blame the moral character of its citizens. But systemic corruption is an emergent property of a specific administrative and economic architecture. It is a mechanical friction point. In India, this friction is driven by three foundational variables: cumbersome administrative red tape, wide discretionary monopolies, and severe economic scarcity. When these combine, workflows transform into lucrative choke points. Citizens pay speed money simply to bypass the backlog. Historically, the government's response to this friction was to deploy investigative agencies to hunt down the individuals collecting the tolls. Today, the strategy relies heavily on digital disintermediation, building a technological bridge directly over the toll gate. To understand how India is attempting to patch its state capacity, we must first map the mechanical flaws of the analog system. Only then can we evaluate if the digital patches actually hold. The macroeconomic baseline of this system is defined by a severe mismatch between supply and demand. There is a persistent scarcity of quality public goods, formal government jobs, and accessible social welfare delivery points. This scarcity operates alongside a massive unorganized sector. Rampant tax evasion and reliance on cash transactions in areas like real estate generate the untraceable liquidity necessary to fuel parallel illicit economies. High demand and artificially restricted supply create the perfect environment for middlemen. These brokers insert themselves into the gap, extorting rents from vulnerable citizens desperate for basic state services. The administrative layer actively exacerbates this scarcity. Cumbersome bureaucratic workflows, excessive documentation requirements, and delayed file approvals create long queues. At the front of those queues are field-level officials holding substantial discretionary authority over business permits, construction tenders, and land records. For decades, this authority operated with virtually no transparent checks. Over time, the constant friction normalizes the behavior. A fatalistic chalta hai attitude takes root, lowering public resistance and establishing corruption as a standard operating expense for daily life. In an environment of extreme scarcity and opaque procedures, a bribe becomes a rational economic tool for securing baseline survival. This local administrative extortion does not happen in a vacuum. It is heavily subsidized by the political layer above it. Running a modern election campaign in India requires immense, continuous streams of financial capital. The need for campaign funding fosters opaque political donations, deep nexuses with corporate lobbies, and quid pro quo policymaking that favors donors over public interest. This environment frequently incentivizes the entry of individuals with criminal backgrounds into politics, which weakens legislative oversight and baseline governance standards. The consequences trickle down directly to the bureaucracy. Honest administrators face arbitrary transfers and punitive postings, while political pressure paralyzes independent law enforcement agencies. Informal networks based on patronage, caste, and kinship ties often take precedence over institutional merit. Resource distribution is determined by who you know, rather than formal procedure. This is systemic capture. The administrative choke points at the bottom are actively maintained because they extract the rents necessary to fund the political layer at the top. Eradicating this friction is nearly impossible when the legal oversight mechanisms are controlled by the very networks profiting from the design. India's traditional response to rent-seeking relied almost entirely on statutory oversight, vigilance administration, and the threat of legal punishment. The state constructed a dense legal deterrent framework. The Prevention of Corruption Act criminalized bribe-giving, while the RTI Act allowed citizens to demand internal public records. This legal framework is enforced by apex investigative bodies like the Central Bureau of Investigation, which handles high-profile corruption and interstate economic fraud. Alongside them, the Comptroller and Auditor General executes constitutional audits of government revenues and expenditures to detect fiscal irregularities. But this traditional model fractures at the judicial pipeline. Lengthy trial procedures, massive court backlogs, and protracted appeals result in low conviction rates. Furthermore, weak safety protocols and exhausting clearance procedures required to investigate senior officials deter whistleblowers from stepping forward. A law only shapes behavior if the penalty is swift and reliable. Legal deterrents lose their impact when corrupt individuals know a trial will likely take decades. Realizing the limits of the judicial pipeline, governance strategies shifted. Instead of attempting to catch and punish the corrupt middleman after the fact, the goal is now engineering him out of the transaction entirely. This concept is known as disintermediation, and its most massive deployment in India is the Direct Benefit Transfer System. The architecture relies on the JAM Trinity. It uses Aadhaar biometric verification to confirm the exact identity of the recipient, mathematically eliminating the ghost accounts that middlemen once used to siphon funds. By integrating John Donne bank accounts and mobile connectivity, the state created a direct financial pipeline. Subsidies bypass local politicians and land directly in the accounts of the unorganized sector. This exact logic was then applied to public procurement. Historically, manual tendering was heavily manipulated through biased desk approvals, allowing officials to steer lucrative government contracts to favored corporate networks. To solve this, the government e-marketplace transitioned public procurement to an end-to-end online portal, replacing human discretionary authority with standardized algorithmic vendor matching. Even with welfare and procurement digitized, one critical friction point remained: the direct face-to-face scrutiny between an administrator and a taxpayer. To dismantle this power dynamic, the government introduced the Faceless Assessment Scheme. Income tax scrutiny and appeals are now routed through randomized, automated digital allocations. A business owner in Mumbai might have their tax file assessed by an anonymous officer in Chennai. Removing the physical interface neutralizes the opportunity for extortion. The fully digital MCA 21 registry applies this to corporate compliance, removing discretionary desk approvals for company registrations and filings. At the state level, digital mapping and automated land record registries are stripping away the manual documentation processes that historically enabled illegal land transfers and tampering. These digital frameworks take transparency out of the hands of the individual bureaucrat. It transitions from a legal mandate into an inescapable structural default. Contrasting the old, friction-heavy administrative network with streamlined digital pathways, the reduction in systemic friction is measurable. Disintermediation effectively ensures state welfare reaches its intended targets without leakage. But technology has strict structural limits. Code cannot execute search warrants, and algorithms cannot vote. Digital tools do not solve the high cost of modern elections, nor do they inherently regulate the opaque political donations required to fund them. High-level corporate lobbying and the criminalization of politics remain largely insulated from automated land registries and faceless tax assessments. True state capacity requires a dual mandate: robust, independent legal oversight to check the political elite, running parallel to algorithmic efficiency that serves the masses. Legal deterrents remain necessary to punish individual actors, but the long-term objective of state capacity is a governance architecture where rent-seeking is mathematically impossible.